All right, we're live. Here we are. My name's Tim Westbrook, and I love being sober. I love my life today, and my dream with this show, the goal of this show is to carry the message and share with as many people as possible content and information that can help as many people as possible get to a place where they love being sober as well. And today I guess first off, today we're going to talk about how to treat sex addiction and the treatment of sex addiction and sex addiction in general. And typically when people hear about addiction, they don't think of sex addiction. They don't think of process addictions. They don't think of gambling addictions. And sex addiction is a serious thing. It's a major issue. And I think it's come to light more so over the last couple of years as well. But there still are people out there that just truly don't understand sex addiction. So I'm super excited to have Dr. Marcus Earle here with me today. And Dr. Earle joined his father, Dr. Ralph Earle, at Psychological Counseling Services in 1988 after obtaining his doctorate in marriage and family therapy. He is currently licensed in Arizona as a psychologist as well as a marriage and family therapist. He has spent most of his career developing the PCS intensive program, training, mentoring other professionals, and working therapeutically with individuals, couples, and families. Dr. Earle, welcome to the show. So good to have you.
Thanks, Tim. Sure good to see you. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, we are. I'm just again super grateful that you were able to take some time out to be with me today and to talk about this subject, because it's something that I think more people need to learn more about.
Yeah.
And today we're going to talk about, again, sex addiction, how to effectively treat sex addiction, what to look for in a therapist, what you look for in a therapist. Your treatment center is in Old Town Scottsdale, and you opened in 1974, so you've been around a long time. People from all over the country, all over the world come to PCS to receive treatment for sex addiction, and you guys do an amazing job. I've seen the work that you've done firsthand, and I did my pre-practicum and my practicum at PCS, so I spent about 20 hours a week there, which was an amazing experience. And I've seen lots of people from the beginning of the week to the end of the week. There's a huge shift, a huge transformation. So the work that you do is just amazing. So again, just so grateful to have you here. So before we start digging into sex addiction, I want you to share with us your journey and how you got to where you are.
Well, I'm glad we get to talk about that, because you said it started in 1974, and I didn't start it in 74. So that was my dad. I was about 13 at the time. So I came out here in 88. And, what's so interesting is, actually to my dad and I, that I even chose to be in this field. So, that in of itself is somewhat miraculous. And then the choice to work with my dad was a whole nother thought process, and that's been a learning over time as well. So there's a long story to all this, but let me stay focused on the professional side for the moment, which is, my dad started the practice in 74 and had about 8 professionals. And then I came out, and there's a lot of shift in what was going on in the late 80s, early 90s with insurance and those types of things. And so what we did is we started referring to Marilyn Murray, and she would see 2 people a week for 20 hours each. And so we go, this is effective. And so we started mixing, what she was doing in terms of the intensity of meeting with clients with what my dad and I were doing, at the time, which was to, when clients would come in, to make sure they met with, 2 or 3 people, because this realization that, more therapists, more perspectives is better than just one therapist and one perspective. And so as we continue to evolve that, I realized that mixing those two ways of doing treatment. One is doing a lot in a short period of time. The other is using, more than one therapist. We kept evolving this intensive program to what it is now, which is it's a 8-day program, starts at Saturday at noon and ends the following Saturday at noon. And people get 65 hours of contact in that period of time, and about 35 hours of individual. So it's just a lot of treatment. Good news for us is a lot of our clients get to stay with you in your recovery home, and so that provides some stability for them, ongoing community when they go back. And so this program right now is the COVID has put a bump and hiccup in it. We went online for a period of time, and now we have to restrict how many people so we can keep physical space in person, which is certainly important right now. But what's really cool is clients get to come in and they get to experience, not one therapist, but really about 10 different therapists. Individually, they get about 5 or 6 different therapists. And so there's a mixture in that. So one, you get different personalities, and so a client will respond different to different personalities. So we learn more about them, they learn more about them. The different modalities we use, so whether somebody tends to be more cognitive behavioral, if they tend to be more experiential, if they use EMDR, somatic experiencing. So the client's getting different types of touches, and in that, finding out what fits them better, what's more of a struggle, including with the therapist. Sometimes the clients struggle with one therapist or more. And then that's educational too. For that begins to inform them more about themselves. Just what is this? What's going on? And we encourage them to stay in that process with that therapist rather than just firing that therapist, which is the first thing. I don't want to meet with them anymore.
Right, because it's hard work.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So first, I want to just point out you mentioned 65 hours of therapy in 7 days or in 8 days?
8 days.
So
yeah.
65 hours of therapy in 8 days. 35 of those hours are individual.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is I think that's massive. I mean, that's not something that happens at most treatment centers, right? So tell me how, how does that, what kind of an impact? And I know that you guys have toyed with it. And first you started with Marilyn Murray doing 20 hours with 2 different clients in 1 week. And it's evolved, and having the different therapists involved. So how many different therapists will be involved with that 35 hours of individual therapy?
Yeah, in the individual, they'll probably have 5 to 7 different therapists. It depends on the schedule, because each schedule made up for a client is unique to them. And so, and then in addition to that, with the group therapy, they end up having an additional 5 to 6 different therapists with different group leaders. So they do get contact. They are in contact with a number of different therapists, which is super helpful. So starting off, this is a great thing about my dad is he's an entrepreneur, and let's just try it, and I'm going, oh my gosh, it's going to overwhelm clients, seems like a good idea, but I was certainly more tentative at the time, and have learned with time, this is really powerful what goes on, because what I believe occurs is that people don't have time to reconstitute and regroup and to go back to the old ways of doing it. So they're constantly being stretched and encouraged to dig deeper and deeper inside themselves. And we have fatigue working in our favor, those types of things.
Right.
Plus they do tend to develop community with one another. And so and then I think community with their group of therapists. So I do think fairly quickly there's a sense of being known, a sense that this place is safe enough, to do the hard work that I need to do, because, our goal is to create a space for them to where they feel held and feel there's an opportunity to do some work that they've not done before. And that's our goal, is to take people that have typically done some hard work. Some haven't done much, but for those that have, they say, let's stay with the things that maybe you didn't stay with before, and maybe you moved off too quickly. Let's get into the things that maybe you didn't talk about before because it felt too shameful or too scary to talk about it. Let's dig into those types of things, because as we know, with addiction, the things that we don't deal with, the things that we do keep from ourselves and we keep from others is our vulnerability. And working to help people understand that you can go into these really vulnerable spaces, often filled with tremendous amount of shame. Many times things I just swore I'm never going to talk to anybody about. And when they find out that they can talk about it, one with a therapist, then 2 or 3, 4 or 5 different therapists. And not only that I'm encouraged to talk about this in group. What begins to unfold is this realization that I can, and in the I can, there's this healing, this repairing that begins to happen as an individual learns they can come alongside the most wounded part of themselves and begin to nurture that part of themselves that's felt alone, isolated, neglected, left behind. Not many times intentional. It's just what we do. We learn to cope, growing up. And addiction for many is one of those learned ways of coping.
Addiction is a solution.
Yes.
It's a solution.
And that's just such an interesting thing, because to me that there's certainly the biological piece, that's an addiction. Not everybody that turns towards sex or turns towards alcohol or whatever gets hooked, and so for those of us that have some predisposition to get hooked on these things, that then creates the problem. And you wrap that around, this I'm trying to not feel, all that's going on around me. I'm trying to make it through life. It's ingenious, our creativity. And we tend to villainize addiction. We tend to villainize our addict, if you will, rather than looking at that part of us as such a help. Certainly harm and damage has happened. But that's for me a combination of 2 things. One, that's the hallmark of addiction, as you leave a wake of destruction. And the other part of that is, this is a childhood way of coping. This is what I came up with when I was young. And I think honoring that part of us that did the best that he or she could, to help us through really difficult times, rather than just saying, bad addict, I'm ashamed of my addict, to say, yeah, I don't like what's happened. And yet, I decided this when I was young, typically. And so let me just sit with this part and help that part to understand this isn't necessary anymore. We don't need to keep doing life this way. And, that in some ways is an oversimplification, and yet sometimes simple things work.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just say, yeah, this isn't working. I shouldn't be doing life this way. I mean, it's not that easy, but that is the first step, though, right? The realization what they're doing is not working, and that can't change things on their own. Now, I want to go back to, you mentioned fatigue, and you have fatigue in your favor. So when doing intensive therapy for hours upon hours, I mean, there's like 12 hours a day of therapy. So explain to me, what do you mean when you say you have fatigue on your side?
I think we're all really capable of regrouping and letting ourselves know that, well, maybe I don't need to do that, maybe, and coming up with ways of avoiding, so we can avoid through activity, we can avoid thinking about different things, we can avoid by denying, that I don't know that I need to do that. The more fatigued we get, the less defended. A lot of times, some people are able to get more defensive, more defended. I think we all get more defensive when we're tired. But it's this ability to really defend ourselves. And when for me, this tiredness allows and promotes, I don't have the energy to fight. So let me just kind of go with this more. And that's what I mean by that is I just think that energy to fight, I don't want to fight. I'm tired. I keep talking about these things. I keep hearing these types of things from the therapist, from my group that I'm with. maybe it's time to just let go and go with it. So I think that's what I mean by that. The fatigue can work in our favor.
Okay. Okay. So let's, one of the things I want to talk about even before we started talking about treatment, there are lots of people out there that don't truly understand sex addiction. So let's talk about the definition of sex addiction and what happens. Like talk about the behavior for a minute.
Yeah, it's a really hot topic because and I think early on the field didn't do a very good job of distinguishing addiction versus healthy sexual expression, because what we do know about sexual expression is it's diverse, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And I think in the sex addiction field, we were too quick to pathologize what may have been normal and healthy sexual expression. And so that currently the field is kind of catching up with itself and making sure to not pathologize that which is just a normal erotic expression for an individual. And so when sex becomes problematic is when a person is trying to stop behavior, and it's not because they're embarrassed of something that's just a normal attraction for them, and that's an important distinction. So if somebody is more visual and pornography is something that is just normal stimulation, got to be careful to not say, okay, that's a problem that you do that, and to just get into work to get into that person's world and that perspective, and what does this mean to you? So is this part of sexual expression that maybe you maintain, and then maybe you're going to have some really hard conversations with your partner because that feels threatening to your partner. Right. And so then that becomes interesting conversation for the two of them. What we're talking about is a person that it just takes over the individual's life. And what I mean by that is that they're thinking about viewing pornography, most of the day, if not all the day. It starts to interrupt their ability to focus on work. It gets in the way and interferes with intimacy, with a significant other. And they're spending hours and hours, and then they begin to escalate the behavior to where, this type of pornography isn't enough for me. Let me keep looking at this. And they start getting into pornography that goes against their values. And so they're starting to engage in viewing things. And sometimes just the looking at pornography goes against their values, which we could debate, is that just too conservative perspective? And yet I think people have a right to hold whatever values they hold. And so if pornography is not in line with their value system, then that's something to be respected. And so when people are engaging more, and they continue to engage in more than fits with their value system, that's one dimension of it. The other is, they've worked to stop, and they've sometimes gone to great lengths to stop, and not been able to. And so then they find that they're hiding the behavior. It's a secret, and they're keeping it from people in their lives, the people that they're honest with otherwise, about other things. Mm-hmm. And so when there's this effort to stop, there's this escalation of the behavior, and there's them beginning to hide what I'm doing from the people that I don't want to be hiding from, but I find myself doing that. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that I think shifted into an addictive process. I also like, the terminology, and I'm forgetting the name of the person that came up with right now, but this, this repetitive, compulsive, I don't know, see, I've just lost it now, but in essence, what it is, it's a way of coping with trauma, and I keep repeating the same behavior to soothe myself, and for some people that works better because it's a bit more gentler perspective on it. It's not this addiction that's got the best of me. It's a way I've learned to come alongside myself and cope with this. Ritualized compulsive seeking behavior, I think, is so.
Well, I think it's similar to alcohol or drugs, where you have a glass of wine, or you have a beer or a couple beers for some people, and it's just
right.
And they don't they're not hiding it from anybody. It's like they're out in the open, they're having it because it's not a problem. It's not causing issues in their relationships. It's not causing issues at work. It's not causing them to do harmful things. Whereas it's similar to like sex addiction, when it's something that normal humans do and need, right? It's almost like food. Like we need food, and as human beings we need human connection. And now when it becomes a problem, it's like, okay, if I have to hide this, if I have to hide my behaviors from my loved ones, from my significant other, from other people, that's when you kind of know you might have a problem, right?
Yes. And it's so interesting because our culture hasn't done very good at educating people on healthy sexuality. So the tricky part for people is, just have I not talked about it because in our culture we don't talk about it, or have I not talked about it because it's something that is harming me. And I think that's the distinction we're trying to work out when clients come in, even if they self-label themselves. So what is this for you? So whether it's pornography, and maybe you're a visual person and that becomes part of a healthy sexual expression, for self and with a partner. If it's having an affair, for some people, they don't want to be in a relationship, and they just haven't sorted that out before they got married, or they got into a primary relationship, and they're more comfortable in an open relationship. And everybody has their own value statement around that. And for some people, that is the way they feel they want to express their sexuality. Again, we're in difficult conversations because if they're already in a committed relationship, they didn't come out with that ahead of time.
Right.
It can become particularly challenging. That's our goal, is to help people to sort that out. So is the behavior problematic for you because it just doesn't fit, and it's something that you came upon when you were younger and got out of control? Or is it something that's just part of who you are? And that needs to get sorted out to where you decide if that's what you want to continue, and then how are you going to sort that out in your relationship, if they're in a relationship.
Okay. So, and I like eating disorders. There's lots of different. There's so many different forms of sex addiction. Like what there's it's pornography, affair. What are some of the different things that you see?
Just about everything. So, sometimes people develop just focus on a particular thing, and there is certainly a distinction between a sex offense, sex offending with minors, and a sex addiction, and yet they can coexist with one another. There's certainly a lot of, and to stay gender specific with men, where they find themselves attracted to, young women that are kind of on the bubble in their mind. So are they a minor, and teenage, or an adult? And while we do know that for adult men, being attracted to teenage young women is normal, it's a line not to be crossed. And yet for somebody that's out of control and an addict, they might keep stretching that line and find themselves in trouble. By definition, are they an offender because they've crossed that line? Yes. Is probably the addiction more primary for them than them being an offender? Yeah. So that there's just so much, that comes through the door, that we could spend hours talking about, the diverse expression of something that's out of control for somebody. I think the biggest thing that I would want people to know is that, there's an opportunity to talk to somebody and get it sorted out. If you sit with and I think one of the things you want to talk about is with a therapist. If you select a therapist and you go into that therapist and it seems like they're really narrow in their perspective, that probably isn't the right therapist for you. If it seems like they're open to exploring and looking at, what's going on and how it it may be something that's okay, and also you're saying that's a problem, and but they want to explore the whole thing. Great. But it can be narrow on two sides, so on one side it's a problem, and then narrow on the other side, no, it's not a problem at all. And that's part of the division in the field right now.
Right.
And so you want somebody that's able to straddle both of those perspectives, and will allow you to explore for yourself what fits. So I don't know if you want to go. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say. So we're talking about how to find a therapist, right? It's like if somebody thinks that they might have an issue or a problem, well, first off, let's start with you, because you have, how many therapists do you have at your treatment center? I think you had 28 or about 30, right?
Yeah, it's between 25 to 30, depending on who's coming in with COVID and who's not.
Right. Which we're gonna get to sex addiction and COVID, and how the COVID pandemic has affected people with that addiction. We're gonna get to that. But first off, when you're looking for a therapist, because you've worked with tons of therapists that are interns, that are already therapists, like, what do you look for when interviewing somebody to join your practice as a therapist or as an intern?
Yeah, the same thing I'm looking for when I'm personally looking for a therapist for myself, is an individual who is open to looking at themselves, who is willing to take care of themselves. The system it works, and it's chaotic, and so, as coming into the system and figuring it out it's not easy. So, somebody that, has the confidence to figure out, what this system is and how to make it work for them. Mm-hmm. That's the type of mindset that I want. Equally important, and perhaps more important, is somebody that's willing to work on themselves, is willing to look at, when I'm doing this work, how is it affecting me? What's coming up for me as I do this work? Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting, because I think as therapists, there is this idea that for some, I need to be together, I need to be put together, I need to be in really good shape for meeting with clients. And there's a yes and a no to that. Mm-hmm. And some think being a really good therapist, on the other side of the extreme, is I need to be fluid in what's going on in my life, and I need to be really transparent, so that I can connect with clients. And you can be too far out on either one of those. Yeah. And yet the mixture of that is to be able to hold space when, somebody has so much going on. Somebody that is able to hold space when things get tense, and not try to just fix it, alleviate the tension, make things better. I have to watch for myself. I'll use humor a lot when things get tense, that I'm not misusing my humor, which I do. Yeah. And so sometimes I've apologized, to people and said, sorry. I think that's the other part is does a person feel grounded to you? And can they sit with you and it not become about them? So it doesn't become about the therapist. Yeah. That it is about you. They may share part of their story as a way of connecting with you, maybe helping you to feel at ease. You're not alone. What's going on, and can they mix it up between, working with your cognitive piece, what goes on in your head, with what goes on in your gut. Can they mix it up with you to where everything isn't always just a conversation? Mm-hmm. Do you find yourself dropping into things, and when you drop into some emotion, can they go there with you and encourage you to stay with that emotion? Do they know what to do when you're in your emotion? Can they help you to work with it, and be comfortable with what you're feeling? And that's the kind of therapist I think people want. That's the kind of therapist, that if I see the potential of somebody that's interning with us to become that kind of therapist, that's who I want to have, be with us, and sometimes I sometimes I don't get that right.
Right.
So for me, then I'm looking at, what was going on for me at the time I was choosing people, so what, and I think that's the other part, is a therapist that is able to self-reflect.
Right. Well, and I think there's, when a person needs to be able to be present, pay attention, and be aware of the other person. Really, it's kind of like they do need to show up with their game face. At the same time, they need to be vulnerable at times when appropriate. Again, it's being present. That's what I'm hearing you say, anyways. Is
yes.
When they need to be present, and when it is time to be vulnerable, maybe share parts of their story it will be helpful to the client, then that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, I think the part that many therapists struggle with is the willingness to take something on. The willingness to confront, a term that my dad found, and I forget who the therapist coined it, but carefront, to carefully confront, the client. And this gets mixed reviews from therapists. Well, we're not supposed to put our agenda on the client. And so, I can't tell you how many clients have come in and say, I just never got any feedback from my therapist. Mm-hmm. And, and then, my thought process is they're paying me money, and if I'm just going to be a neutral, space for them, and that just doesn't make any sense. And, I have to be careful that I'm not trying to create, Marcus clones, that isn't the goal. And yet I do have my biases, and I'll let clients know, what they are, and they figure it out pretty quick. To work with me is to not have a box checking therapist. You've probably already figured out, when you're asking for a list and stuff, I'm just going in different places. Yeah. Because for me, therapy is a discovery process. Mm-hmm. And it's my goal to figure out, what's going on for the client, so that's my intensity, is to listen and to continue to have the story unfold to where I get a feel for what's going on for the client. And so I'm checking that out. Sometimes I don't, sometimes I jump, and sometimes I jump too quickly. I'm just glad that I jump, into things. And that's the other thing that I'm wanting for our therapist, and what I believe more therapists I think would benefit from, is take a risk to jump in. The worst that can happen is, you overstep, then that just becomes an opportunity to repair, which is a good process for people to learn. And to learn that with the therapist is a good way to learn it. So it's not a perfect process. And it's okay to shop for therapists. It can be an expensive shopping process. I get that. And yet nevertheless, to call and to have a 5-minute conversation with a therapist is important. You'll learn if the therapist doesn't get back to you, probably not a therapist that you want to be sitting with. Right. And then, if you feel mostly comfortable, but maybe not, then go meet with another therapist or two. So, so that you can hopefully find somebody that just feels like a good fit. Not because they're, like putting on an old comfortable shoe, but a shoe that you think will work for you because it's a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, and to your point, it's therapy is hard work. Therapy is hard work. And to find a therapist, and I've seen you, and you're tough on clients. And when I say tough, what I mean is you ask the difficult questions, and you call them out. And I think that's important, to find a therapist that is going to not just buy the client's story. That's we're not just here to make them feel good. We're here to help them get to a healthy place and move past their behaviors and dig into their behaviors. And really, when they're giving us a show, we got to call them out, or a therapist needs to call them out on it.
Yeah, because that's the thing about addiction, particularly sex addiction, is for a sex addict, there's a lifelong spent hiding and convincing people, I don't have a problem,
Right.
and the individuals get good at it, and that was certainly part of my story. I was just good at hiding, and people didn't have a clue what was going on, and that becomes easy to do. So if you're with a therapist that is not going to push and dig and work to unearth and to kind of break through this facade, it just takes longer, and sometimes you don't get to where you want to be. I'd rather have a client frustrated with me and work it through than a client's just always happy with me. That's not always great for my self-esteem, my sense of self-worth, but that's for me to take care of, as a therapist. If I'm needing if I'm needing the client to help me to feel better about me, or if I'm letting the client work me by getting me to feel better about me, those are both problems.
Yeah. So, okay, now let's speak to the current pandemic we're in. How is that? I mean, I know that addiction is spiking across the U.S., in the world. Mental illness, suicides, those are all up as a result of the pandemic. Let's talk about the effect on people with sex addiction.
It's such a tough time, it's hard for everybody right now. And if you think about sex addiction as, the title of my dad's book is Lonely All the Time, that he wrote with Dr. Greg Crow. Just a really great title, because I think underneath, all addicts, in particular sex addiction, is just loneliness. There's just felt loneliness, that I can't really let people know who I am. So then, I'm isolating myself. If they knew who I really was, they wouldn't like me. And so just by the very nature of that process, I'm isolating myself. And so what this whole COVID experience, pandemic experience has been is about people feeling isolated, and that's why, we, some of the good news is I'm not for the violence and the riots, but people have gotten out to do something because, they're a bit stir crazy. And so that's a good thing right now, racially, some of the stuff that's going on, it's promoting action. On the other side of it is, certainly people that are, that live by themselves, they're struggling. To be single right now is not easy. And especially if you have any health concerns, it's even more demanding. So if you take living a single living person, and then I can't go out and socialize with people, that just amplifies being by myself. And then it triggers the loneliness. I can't do some of the things, like I can't go to the gym, I can't go out to dinner. I can't even just go socialize and just have a chat. I can't sometimes go out for a walk, initially that was going on. And so people were feeling isolated. And how do I comfort myself? I know how to comfort myself. And when, we can sit in front of a computer like we're doing right now, and you can pull up pornography, and it's so easy to do. Or you can have chats with women, you can do webcams, there's all these different ways of quote, connecting with people. Like I can have this conversation right now and I could pull up pornography and you wouldn't know it. And right. You probably know that I was a little bit more disconnected and less engaged. But, if I started that way, that's just who I am, Right. And so how are you going to know? And so that's a big piece. The other part of that is the distance between family members, because if you have an older parent, you don't want to risk infecting them, and so that is isolated. And then if you have a family, then your children are isolated from their peers. And so there's a lot of tension within families, because parents that, that aren't used to educating full-time their children, the family's not used to being together all the time,
Mm-hmm.
all the time, for weeks and months now on end. There's just so much pressure and stress and tension. What do I do with that? I need an outlet. This is the way I relax. This is the way I tune out. And I can just kind of numb myself to all this and get a break, mm-hmm. if you will. So it does make sense that it's escalated because it's also so accessible. and Al Cooper came up this AAA engine, this affordability, accessibility, and it's anonymous, so people don't know,
Right.
and so it is a perfect storm, especially for in the sex addiction world, for it to take off and just get the better of people right now.
So once someone goes to treatment, or they're seeing a therapist, like as a client seeing a therapist, what's the best, do you have any tips for someone seeking therapy, or how they can best use the therapy that they're getting?
Yeah, boy, it's the finding a therapist. I certainly have some opinion about that I've already shared. There's CSAT therapists that are certified sex addiction therapists, and they have some training that's very helpful. I don't think that they're the only therapists that can be helpful, because certainly people have gotten into the field. They've done a lot of really great training, and so it is somebody with a knowledge base about sex addiction is important. And as I already mentioned, I think that needs to be balanced with somebody that also has a knowledge base about healthy sexuality, and what it would be to just have erotic conflict inside oneself that isn't about addiction. It's just, I can't sort out what I'm attracted to and what turns me on. I just can't get that sorted out. So it's not addiction. That's just this erotic conflict that's going on internally. And so Doug Brown Harvey has done some really great work. I know he's training therapists in his model, and so that would be something to look for as well if you'd rather have that style of therapist. And then how to make the use of the therapist. What we regularly say in people in our groups is, please talk about the things you don't want to talk about. So what you hide in therapy are the things that are going to keep you in therapy longer. It's going to keep you returning to therapy, and you're just not helping yourself. If you can't talk openly to your therapist, then it's the wrong therapist. Or maybe you're just not ready to do therapy now, and so that's a choice point for each person. And then the other thing is the willingness and the support to really drop into some really hard emotional work, because it is the type of work that is disruptive. And it can throw you off for a time. And so if you have support to where, it's friends, family, groups, then you're going to fare better in the process, because there's people to hold you up. There's people to talk to. There's people who just come sit with you, if it's just a particularly hard session that you had. They just come and just sit and hold you, and that's part of the difficulty now. If we're isolated, how do we get that support? Right. And so I think people are beginning to find, individuals who have quarantined like they've quarantined, and they feel safer with the way they've done things. And so they're starting to hang out together a bit more. And yet here, in Arizona, it's just a mess. Mm-hmm. So it's becoming more challenging. Yeah. And then we have these different, treatment system. So we have residential treatment system, which is very helpful for people that just can't get away from the behavior, and they're just a mess, and they just can't stop, and life's unraveling, they're unraveling, and they can really, they find it hard to just put like one foot in front of the other. Residential treatment center for those types of individuals, especially if there's some risk of harming self, that's the place to go, because they're going to hold you 24/7. You're going to be in a supportive that everybody's in the same boat. So you're going to find out you're not alone. And they typically have some really great therapists that'll work with you in a group process. And so you learn how to become more open. You get some really great education about what's going on. And so it provides a good foundation, for people that need that foundation. And then there's the type of thing that we do, that there's a number of other programs, across the country. On-Site's a really great program. They're in Tennessee, so they're more on the other side of the country. And so there are other programs that will do something in a shorter time frame. It'll give you a lot in a shorter period of time. And where that's helpful is when things break loose, it's helpful to drop into something for a lot of individuals where I need to get my feet under me right now. They're able to still go to work, and function, and actually for some it's really important they continue to work because of for income, and so to be able to get in and do something in a shorter period of time so they can have that understanding about what's going on, they can see where they're headed, is important. And that's where what you guys do, and what I think a recovery house is so helpful with, is when people have things break loose, it just throws you off your game. Good that it does. But then being able to go into treatment and then be housed in a place where I don't have to worry about, being taken care of. I don't have to worry about meals, and I have some guys I can talk to. That's a great mix for a lot of people when things are very disruptive. And then there's some, where they can do just typical outpatient therapy. Now, they might want to consider doing an hour or two a week, maybe 2 to 4 hours a week. They might want to do something out of the traditional vein of just 1 hour a week, and do more. And then I think the other thing is for those individuals, talk to a therapist about, what are your strengths and what do you think I might be helped by, so that may we include another therapist in my process right now. And that's not done enough. I think team treatment is long overdue as being the norm. Certainly there's issues around insurance and things like that. I think if people are active and they talk to their insurance company and say, yes, I have this person, he or she does this, I also need this, and so I concurrently want to work with this individual. Right. It'd be great if people took more initiative to stand up for what their needs are with their insurance companies. Might have different things unfold for them.
Tell me, so what is your opinion on the importance of therapists that are working as a team? How important is it that they are communicating?
It's absolutely critical. It's a non-negotiable, because and so that's it. Thanks for bringing that up too. I got to plug in my computer. That just is. It's occurring more now, but historically, it just wasn't done. Like one of my great frustrations is, if people jump therapists, which clients do, and then that therapist doesn't communicate with the previous therapist, that's always wrong, always wrong. Yeah. And sometimes a client doesn't want me to communicate with the previous therapist. I say, well, I just won't meet with you. Because, why would you think that I'm going to be different than what happened, or we're going to have a different outcome than what happened before? That would, shame on me for not contacting the previous therapist, to not waste your time and money to know what happened from that person's perspective. Obviously, I'm going to listen to your perspective as well. But it's my job to hold all these different perspectives and to be helpful to you. So really important that therapists communicate to one another. So while concurrent treatment's going on, and that's what I think people, kind of amazed about what we do, because they walk into a session and we already know what's gone on in the previous session with them, which they both find helpful and annoying. So for your treatment team to be on the same page, and here's what we're doing, even if they're kind of stretching you in two different ways, that the therapist would be respecting. Yeah, I know so-and-so is doing this with you, and I think that's really helpful. We're doing this, and I think, over time, this is going to go out this way and come back this way for you. That your therapists trust, one another and respect one another, are not threatened by the other person, because that's a big deal for therapists. We're a pretty insecure group. If that isn't knowledge, public knowledge, it should be. And so if your therapist doesn't have enough wherewithal inside themselves to work with somebody because that's threatening to them, then that's a problem. Now, you can also have a therapist who thinks too highly of themselves and don't think they need any help. Right. So, and I'm not saying that one therapist can't be helpful. One therapist can be helpful to somebody. I just think, I do believe after time with one therapist, it's helpful to bring in somebody else in for additional perspective, and working with a different modality than your particular therapist's strength is.
Right. And one thing I just want to point out, so in your program, and I've seen this happen, a client meets with one therapist,
Yeah.
and they get into an uncomfortable conversation, right?
Right.
And then the therapy session ends, and that client thinks he's off the hook.
Right.
But as he's walking to go see his next therapist, the notes are being sent to the next therapist, so that next therapist is going to pick up from where they left off, which
Yes.
is, to your point, both annoying, frustrating, but great at the same time.
Yeah. And so there's another piece about therapy. We keep landing on some of these things, that's like a non-checklist therapist like me forgets to say. If your therapist doesn't follow up week to week with where you left off, which I haven't done at times, then that therapist isn't paying attention, so if you're restarting, and your therapist forgets what you were talking about the previous week, there's no continuity of care. So you're just going to keep restarting the process again and again. You're going to waste 15 to 20 minutes, of a 45 to 55 minute, therapy hour. And that's valuable time. It's valuable money for people. So you want somebody that's tracking with the process, and is recalling what happened before, so that you actually feel like you're known, and we're chaining these sessions together. Now, initially, there's a get to know you phase, but after you've seen somebody 6 times, there ought to be a direction in that. So
tell me about, and I know how are you on time?
We got about 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. So
thank you.
Is sober living appropriate for somebody that is dealing with sex addiction?
Yes.
And
because the nice thing about it, Tim, is it's an environment where there's more supervision going on, and people are paying attention to what you're doing, in the evening. I think the other thing that's important is you're learning to live in community, because, the biggest, not the biggest, but one of the big parts about sex addiction is the isolation. Addicts, they might have lots of friends, but they really don't have friends, in a sense of deep intimacy. And so that you can learn to hang out and be seen day after day, by the same people and be known by them is really a healing component for addicts in general, particularly sex addicts.
Right. It's like the opposite of addiction is human connection. So healthy human connection, community, those are things that are important, that are going to be helpful, especially while somebody is in an intensive treatment program or just going through a tough time in their life. They're doing really hard work.
Yes, and then the other thing you guys are offering that some others are offering as well is this idea of coaching and kind of coming along, being like a recovery partner for somebody is helpful for a number of people. And you and I have gone around on this and trying to get this to be more a part of what we do. We're working on it, because I think having daily contact, a sponsor is a good person to have as well. And sponsors vary in terms of their effectiveness. The nice thing about a coach is they generally have more training and a bit more perspective. And so to have somebody that's going to check in with you on a regular basis, perhaps initially daily, and then kind of maybe tapering that off with time, that's another way of providing continuity. It's another way of know that you're being seen and you're being heard and you're being known, and there's comfort in that. In addition to the accountability that brings, we like to focus on the accountability. It's important to have accountability. I'd rather focus more on the comfort, of knowing that somebody's going to check in with me, and how that can soothe the part of me that sometimes doesn't feel seen, doesn't feel known, doesn't feel heard. Because I know somebody's kind of, in my sense, got my back, is going to be there for me when the rest of my world is pretty disrupted by what I've done. So it's another thought.
Yeah, it's just another layer of accountability, another layer of support. And especially with like we utilize technology assisted care. So we have an app, which again is just how we Camelback Recovery uses. We utilize that to track our clients, track their daily activities, track their goals, track their progress. And, we can even do GPS tracking with it, which is, it's just an amazing tool that we can use and we're not the only ones that utilize technology assisted care. There's lots of others out there as well. So, well, I know we're wrapping up here. We got a couple minutes left, and any other things you want to share with people before we wrap up?
I think most of the time, I think we've covered a lot of ground. The thing is not waiting. I think so many people wait and they find it hard to take the first step, which is true for so many of us. Unless you're just wired up as a person who's going to jump in and just do something. It's difficult for people to take that first step. And what I would hope is that instead of talking yourself out of and continue to give yourself all the reasons about why not, and maybe I can, and if I just do this, and stop doing that cycle and get in with somebody and find the person that's a good fit for you, and change and shift your world, because it's a better life when a behavior or a substance isn't dictating our life. Or in this wrestling match about who's in charge of us, to where we can actually be more in charge by realizing, that I need help, which is the great, paradoxical piece about recovery is I need to be in charge, and I realize I'm not in charge.
Right. So, I'm powerless, right? It's powerless. I need help. And what's the first thing someone should do if they think they might have a problem or they might need to seek help?
Gosh, there's a lot of first steps. Talk to a friend is the hardest and easiest. Jump into a group. There's lots of Sex Addicts Recovery, Sexaholics Anonymous. There's just a lot of groups out there now to jump into, and go talk to a therapist. People that go to church, talk to a clergy person, talk to your physician. Talk to somebody. Yes. Whatever person you can get yourself to talk to, talk to that person.
Yeah. Awesome. And how can people find you and find out more about the PCS Intensive?
Yeah, we have a website. So it's pcsintensive.com. And then our phone number is 480-947-5739.
Website?
That's it, the www.pcsintensive.com. That.
I blinked for a second. Okay.
That's okay. I do too.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Tim.
I appreciate you. I appreciate everything that you do. And we will talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. It's good to see you. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.